Hi everyone, make sure to donate to support the victims of Hurricane Harvey here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Queens of the Stone Age album, Villains. Queens of the Stone Age is a long-running, hard, and alternative rock outfit that's been going about like 20 years strong now. Several years ago, Josh Homme and company dropped what I felt was one of the greatest records of the band's career, Like Clockwork, a landmark moment, an album that was filled with some pretty fantastic guest musicians. Mark Lanegan, Trent Reznor, Dave Grohl was on here, Elton John, just to name a few. Not only that, but the sound and the production of this album was immaculate. One of the best sounding records from Queens of the Stone Age. The guitars were so crisp and full and heavy, and the bass sounded awesome. The tone of the guitars was great as well. Also, the additional keyboards and pianos and backup vocalists created this sound that was just really thick and dense and beautiful and harmonious and kind of sad and weary. I mean, this was easily one of the band's most despondent albums for sure, and this vibe was matched up with some of Queen's best songs in a long time. While this thing was not as rambunctious as some of the band's earlier stuff, I mean, it was still like a really well-crafted album, very moody, a lot darker, more instrumentally refined. Now, how does a band follow an album like this up? How does a band top such an album? I guess by not caring about topping it. After the illustrious sonic adventure that Queens of the Stone Age took listeners on with their last record, they seem to be throwing this whole thing in reverse, stripping things back, going a bit more skeletal. There are even some speedier and slightly more aggressive cuts on this thing to match this rawer sound, like the very jittery track Head Like a Haunted House, which sounds way amped, like the band is about to snap, one of my favorite cuts on this thing. But the forlorn nature of Like Clockwork still sort of lingers on a handful of cuts from this record. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the cuts on this thing had been written around the time that the songs from Like Clockwork were written, because I am getting some very similar vibes, almost like some of the tracks on this thing are like in the same spirit. But again, what's changed and so drastically is kind of the sound and the production on this thing. It's just a bit rougher, a bit muddier in spots as well, and I'm just not sure to what end. It's an aesthetic change I don't think is going to wow listeners who are coming down from the high of Like Clockwork, especially when you have moments like the end of UN-REBORN again, where there's actually kind of a cool sax part worked into the finish of the song, but the mix is kind of so smothering and so tinny that you can't really get a grip of it. I was surprised, but then also not, when I heard that Mark Ronson produced this thing, because not only is he, such a popular producer, has produced, a lot of great pop tracks that I enjoy so much. However, I sort of put two and two together. The flat, almost colorless, and very bone-dry sound of this album kind of reminded me of what Mark had done on the Black Lips album Arabia Mountain, which the production of that record was one of my least favorite things about it. I do think the approach Mark took to the sound of this album kind of saps the energy out of some of these cuts, especially on The Evil Has Landed. To put this record kind of bluntly, it just sounds like Queens of the Stone Age are taking it back to basics a little bit, but with some sonic shortcomings. There are some highlights in this thing, like the incredibly funky opener Feet Don't Fail Me Now, which has the super danceable and killer bass and guitar riff. I just can't not move to it. The lyrics on this thing emphasize moving and dancing, but also kind of using that as a metaphor for the pace and challenges of life. There are also some crazy lead melodies on this thing, a really solid bridge. And I also want to point out the eerily beautiful song Fortress, which I think is one of the most heartfelt and mature songs the band has ever put together. I mean, this song has some of the best lyrics I've ever heard on a Queens of the Stone Age track. This whole idea of being someone's refuge, giving someone an emotional fortress of sorts when theirs crumbles. The song is so good and it's so beautiful, and it's such a nice ballad at its core that I kind of wish it made it onto Like Clockwork. We have the multifaceted and very lengthy Un-REBORN Again, which kind of has this manic, sort of unsettling vocal delivery. The lyrics to me feel kind of like a torture chamber of dark, sexual, and druggy imagery. A lot of mentions of kind of the devil sort of altering your perception, or I guess evil altering your perception, I guess in this attempt to seek out the fountain of youth. In my opinion, this cut and sort of the lyrical themes in it truly embody the cover art of the record, and the song moves through a lot of cool, awesome passages. I mean, the string breakdown toward the end, a solid bridge on this thing as well. There's a really weird keyboard jam in the midst of the song that's pretty cool. However, there are still some cuts that did really underwhelm me, not just because of the production. I mean, the way you used to do is still sort of, I don't know, a bit of a lukewarm cut in my opinion. I thought the song sounding like some very moody ZZ Top runoff to my ears would eventually just kind of wear off and the track would grow on me once I heard it on the album itself, but not really. It's just kind of so-so to me. The main riff on Domesticated Animals reads as like a little too stiff in my opinion. I'm not exactly sure if the tension that I feel like the band is trying to put into this song would have been helped if the sound was just a little bit more high fidelity, a bit fuller. The track doesn't really come to life for me until we get this like immensely dark and powerful wall of guitars that really kind of fills out the latter chunk of the track. Josh's vocals also kind of hit a passion peak at this point in the song too. We have the song Hideaway, which is easily the most forgettable cut in the track listing here, easily the most mild song in the whole record. And to be honest, outside of the driving proggy finish of the closing track on here, Villains of Circumstance, this song is like one of the drabbest cuts that Queens of the Stone Age have ever written and recorded. Like, not only does it not really justify its length, but the chord progressions are so cliched at points, the vocal melodies are lifeless and totally uninteresting. You know, this album for me, it's just kind of a mixed bag. It's not a terrible record. You know, Queens of the Stone Age have not completely fallen off, but it almost feels like we're just kind of hearing, you know, leftovers from the band's last album, but with some sort of mediocre production. And I think, honestly, there is a discussion to be had about whether or not this album is Queen's worst. I mean, Lullabies to Paralyze, there's not really any contest here when it comes to which record has the better crop of songs, the more consistent crop of songs. And Era Vulgaris, while that record does have some mediocre tracks on it, it does have some mediocre writing, there are some flubs in the track list there. It is a more dissonant, experimental, a wilder and more interesting record. By comparison, Villains is much more predictable, and I don't know, there's not really that X factor there. There are a handful of songs on this thing that I would certainly return to, but this thing is nowhere near like on the level of the band's best stuff. I'm feeling a decent to strong 6 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Just leave an angry comment in the comments if you are angry. Okay? Queens of the Stone Age, Villains. Here is a review of Like Clockwork next to my head over here. Check that out. And yeah, that's it. I'll catch you guys in the next one. You're the best forever.